So, hello everyone. We're delighted to have David back with us here at the Full Circle Project, and we're going to be starting a series now of bite-sized pieces of information which David is going to share with us based on his experience and practice as a warrior. So, David, welcome back. How are you?
Hey, Louise, doing great. Thank you so much for having me back. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, what are we going to start with today? Because we're going to be, I think, breaking down some of the philosophy and the practice of warriorship and looking at perhaps integrating this into our lifestyle. Where are we going to start with this today?
I think that it's important to give people some definitions of terms because I'm constantly speaking to people that have different ideas about this concept of warriorship, and I kind of like making it clear the angle that I'm coming from when I'm presenting this, because this particular thesis, I guess you'd call it, is really just my own personal interpretation and adaptation of the information that I've gained over years of practicing in both the physical martial arts and also studying the philosophical and esoteric aspects of martial arts and warriorship. So it helped me to understand the definition of terms. So I would like to start with understanding the difference between a warrior, especially a warrior in the context that I'm speaking about, and a soldier or a fighter, someone that's, in that type of profession. So I think that's the best place to kick it off.
Yeah, that sounds excellent because I know that sometimes I I have people either coming up to me or writing to me a little bit about this warrior figure, this warrior archetype that we've decided to use really to represent the kind of spirit I think that we need to call upon in these times. And some people feel uncomfortable with that, and I'm sure it's to do with the fact that they haven't yet explored what it means in the sense that we're looking at it from this perhaps more Oriental philosophy, as opposed to what's been presented to us through the media and through films and myths and stories as the soldier. And I just have the impression that the soldier is someone that bows down to authority, whereas the warrior is perhaps taking this upon himself, to understand the power of
right.
true
And
authority.
that's exactly it. And what I would only add to that is if we get actually specific with the definitions. I just actually looked it up just to make sure we've got all the right types of aspects to understanding the derivatives and the origins of the etymology of the words. But the word soldier, I want to start with that, because if we can understand where that came from and what that concept is, and then we can break down the warrior and we can go through that, I think it'll help clear that up. So when we look up the word soldier, it derives from the Middle English word soudeur and from the Anglo-French soldier. My French is horrible. And it means mercenary, okay? So it means somebody that is fighting for a shilling's worth, or they're fighting for a wage, or they're hired to perform a particular action and follow a particular agenda. The definition is not referring to somebody that's operating on their own faculties. It's that they are fighting for pay. I mean, that word originally derives from the Latin word solidus, which is referring to an ancient Roman coin used in the Byzantine Empire. So they're talking about a coin. They're talking about someone that is fighting for pay, or one having pay. In the medieval Latin, it's solidarius, which literally is translated one having pay. So these words are, if you look at the etymology and the history of the word, and then you compare that to what we've seen in history with the function of a soldier class, you'll see that obviously these are, this is a whole collective of, it would be a collective, but it's basically serving a military function, whether you're on an individual level or a collective level, that is fighting for pay. They're not working from a place of fighting for some right cause or working for justice and strength in their community. They blindly follow orders. They're there to be the strong arm of the government or of a king or a ruler, and we've seen that many, many times throughout history. So soldier, when I'm using that word soldier, I'm talking about one who's fighting for pay. And if you actually read a lot of the literature coming out of the ancient period, whether it's the medieval period or especially when you go into studying ancient Japan, they would look at somebody that is only fighting for pay, who has no purpose or deeper meaning or any kind of spiritual or religious ties to any kind of ideology. They're looking at someone that's only fighting for pay or material possessions as a soldier, as a mercenary, and that they would be considered a lower class of warrior. A true warrior to these people would have been somebody at a much higher level of understanding. And if I actually read a quote from Morihei Ueshiba on this to kind of give you the warrior side, he says that the way of the warrior has been misunderstood. It is not a means to kill and destroy others. To smash, injure, or destroy is the worst thing a human being can do. The real way of the warrior is to prevent such slaughter. It is the art of peace, the power of love. So that kind of definition coming from Ueshiba, and Morihei Ueshiba, by the way, was the founder of the art of Aikido. He was a master of many of the Japanese martial arts, but then kind of created his own derivative art, which was all about energy, and he wrote very deeply about the philosophy of what it meant to be a warrior. He discussed the concept of Budo and Bushido, which in Japanese terms, that's referring to warriorship. And when I first came across this and compared the two, I compared the definition of a soldier with this definition of the warrior, and there are many others I could quote. I was seeing that there was a difference there between the two, difference between the functions. So the warrior was acting more as a preventative measure. They were a protective force. They were not an aggressive force. If you look back at even the native Aboriginal tribes, and you see that there was a warrior class amongst them, and their job, their function, was to not seek out wars of aggression and necessarily go out and try to take over land or territory. Although I'm not saying that never happened. It's just philosophically speaking, their function instead was to protect the tribe, to protect the community, and to stand up for justice and virtue, and make sure that they're performing the action very similar to like an immune system, flushing out the toxins. So the warrior had a very specific function in ancient societies, whether it be from some of the smaller communities or tribes or whatnot, and then even leading into the bigger empires and kingdoms and whatnot. But what happened was that I feel, when I look at history, the warrior class, the concept of warriorship, as I kind of illustrated by that quote from Ueshiba, that was something that was slowly eradicated and replaced by the soldier. So instead of having empowered, enlightened individuals who were there to stand up for truth and justice and protect the community, they were converted into mercenaries at arms that were sent to war, not necessarily to fight for something they believed in, but they were fighting because that was their that was their profession, that was their pay. They didn't care what the mission was. They didn't care what the outcome was. They were told, all right, go over there, wipe out that village, kill those people, take the land, take the resources, and bring it back. And that soldiering class, based on that definition, their function would be to say, all right, let's do it. There's no second thought about it, and that's something they're never going to question. So I feel it's important to understand the difference between the two. And the warrior doesn't only serve a physical function in society. It's not something that's only there to go to war or to take up arms or to serve that function. It's there as a multifaceted function, and it's there to perform the service of empowering the community and working on keeping everybody working together in harmony so that there's a prevention of war and strife and criminality in that community. So if we look at those representations today in our society, you would think of the police and the military. And I would only ask the listeners, do you feel, by and large, that today, in our modern society, the police and the military are serving the function of a warrior in our society, or are they serving the function of a soldiering class, where they're following orders, they're not questioning authority, they're not working on their own individual intuitive capacity, Or do you think that, you know, they're more like, it's more likely that they're serving some, you know, government class, or they're following some orders or following some rules or whatnot? I think it's the latter. I think that we see that by and large. Now, I've worked with many police and military training martial arts, and I ask them always, you know, what was it originally that inspired you to join the police, to become a police officer? Or what was it originally that inspired you to become a member of the military? And they'll always talk about, you know, oh, honor and serving my community or serving my country and all of this. And then you start getting into deeper questions like, well, what if the overall agenda of your country, you know, or the people that are giving you the orders, what if their agenda isn't there to serve the best interest of the people that you're supposed to be protecting? What if, you know, you start asking these questions about morality, really. And that's when the conversation starts to change. And there are many people that I've met that they understand that their whole apparatus has become corrupt, and that they are trying, they often feel that they're trying to work from within to prevent that from, you know, to do what they can to do good in their community. But it's clear that by and large, we're seeing that this is becoming a lot more militarized. The police is becoming more militarized. The function of the police is not there to serve and protect the people, but is there rather to serve and protect, you know, the corporate interests and the government and whatnot, and the powers that be. And we're actually seeing more criminality and corruption in our societies. We're seeing, you know, I'm here in Canada, and a lot of people think Canada is just this peaceful, blissful country where nothing happens, but that's not true. I mean, we see the same kind of gangs and drugs and urban warfare and all these kinds of things going on. So there definitely needs to be that warrior function in our society. However, we're also seeing that by and large, the police and military has become just as corrupt as those criminal forces that they are supposedly there to protect us from. So this is where we can see that this function of warriorship can become very easily corrupted. And it's something that needs to be preserved and taught in a proper way to these individuals, because I believe that many of them do get involved in these roles specifically to, you know, they want to be warriors in our society. They want to do something to help create positive change. They want to be protectors. But many of them are really just doing it because it's a job. They're given a gun and a badge, or they're given a particular position, and they feel powerful when that happens, instead of having some kind of organic internal empowerment take place, which is what is very much stressed in the warrior martial art tradition. And so it becomes very washed out, and all of these philosophical understandings of the function of warrior in society gets totally lost and perverted. And so I think it's been perverted over centuries, and I think it's been done by design, because if you had a proper warrior class, or even the individuals in our community or in our country or in our society were empowered on a certain level with this understanding of what it means to be a warrior in everyday life, then you wouldn't really necessarily need a police force, for example. You know, you wouldn't need that. You'd have an empowered society, an empowered community where everybody, you know, it would be like an even playing field, and you wouldn't have so much criminality running around because it would be easily flushed out. But when you disempower that society and you give that function over to a professional class of soldiers, then now you've disempowered that community entirely. They are now under the foot and the rule of the brute force of that, you know, society. And we've seen that so many times throughout history, and I think we're seeing it today, especially in modern America and all over, really. It's really turning into a police state where these, you know, police and military are enforcing draconian laws that are set forth by these corrupt tyrannical governments. So this is something that I think is important to clear up, so that we can understand what warriorship is, understand how it's relevant, understand how this idea can benefit people on an individual level and even on a collective level. And we can try to move past only expressing this through the form of a soldier, and instead working on empowering each individual and bringing about a true warrior, or, you know, warrior class of individuals, for example, in our society, to empower and get rid of all of these negative forces that we see around us. So that's kind of a long answer for that, but it really just helps clear up the definition of terms.
No, it does definitely, David. Thank you, because I found that a really fascinating comparison that you made there. And one thing that ran all the way through, I think, was how money in particular, money corrupts. And we see that everywhere as well. But also the corruption that takes place through the language that we're using and through the media, through the way that these figures and archetypes are actually portrayed, and the way that they've been twisted. So I was really interested to hear you speak about the police and was it also the military that you train as well, that you're involved with training some of those members? Because surely this would be a really good way to illustrate directly to our police forces, many of whom evidently are kind of caught in the fix, because there isn't obviously another option for them to choose from. There isn't a warrior force or class that they could easily step into. They have a choice there if they feel compelled to perhaps stand up and defend their community or their country or whatever their moral choices are based on. That there isn't the opportunity there, is there? That what's in front of them is either they can join the police force or they can join the military. Where else do they go? Is there another option?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'm glad you brought up sort of the warrior archetype. You know, this idea of an archetype was coined by Carl Jung, and his kind of idea that there are different elements that make up human consciousness that come from our ancient past. And it's as if we have a collective memory, like a race memory. It's also been called like a phylogenetic memory, you know, where we remember on a deep level what's happened to our ancestors, you know, on a genetic level. That memory keeps carrying forward. So this archetype of warriorship is embedded in all of us, I feel. And it's expressed itself on both sides of the fence throughout history. We've seen very, very positive warrior cultures and societies and individuals, and we've seen very negative, that other end of the spectrum where it gets corrupted, and usually money is the element that's used, or the illusion of power. This is what I find is very interesting, is that when I speak to a lot of these people, and I don't specifically go and train the military. I've had people that are members of the military come and join into my classes, and the people that I've had come to seek out martial art training, they typically are people who are craving that deeper understanding of martial arts and warriorship, because they maybe didn't get it. They didn't get that kind of training in the police. And I know even here in Canada, even on a technical level, the police are not trained efficiently in martial arts. They're given very, very superficial hand-to-hand combat training, and the rest is all, you know, pull out the taser, pull out the gun, and, you know, that kind of stuff. And the problem with that is if you don't have an empowered police force that is empowered on all levels, you know, mentally, physically, spiritually, they're not fully developed, what happens is they're going to be the first ones to reach for a gun. They're going to be the first ones to be booting your head in, because they're not trained. They're not trained on how to be confident enough to address these different aspects, these different things that are going to pop up in their work. They're not trained how to really efficiently deal with that, other than to use just brute force and to try to go about it that way. And of course, if you also aren't able to discipline your emotions, which is a huge part of martial art training, is that you're learning how to discipline and temper and train those emotional responses, learning how to deal with anger and whatnot, you know, like even if you just imagine something as simple as, you know, you stand up quick and you bump your head on a countertop or something, you know, on your way up, and you just feel that rage, you just want to punch something, right? It's an instant reaction of anger, and there's a reason that reaction's happening. It's happening to, you know, you've been injured, you're going to respond with some kind of defensive action, and that anger is there very quickly to give you that burst of energy to respond. But the problem is that if you don't temper that, if you don't discipline that, it can come out in the wrong way. And if it keeps happening, you can actually learn how to shut off those more intuitive responses that would come from, you know, sort of like a heart-centered response. You know, you're not going to have that ability to respond in a proper way. You're just going to go right away to the first response that you can think of in that situation, which is usually dealing with things on an emotional level, or even at a higher level. They might even completely sever connection to all emotion, and you end up with these more sociopathic or psychopathic types, which is a very extreme form of that. You end up with that as the representative of that in the police or military function or whatever. So the idea here is to what I try to communicate to these people, and I've had many conversations with them, is, you know, that's why I connect deeply with them on the level of, what was it that inspired you to do this job? What was it that made you want to grow up to be a police officer? What was it that made you want to grow up to be in the army or whatever? And they often tell me stories that give you that feeling of, it's sort of like, I guess it would just be like an idea that was crafted for them about this: I'm serving my country and I'm very patriotic to my country, or I'm out there serving and protecting justice. I'm on the streets and I'm dealing with criminals. But the problem is the lines start to get blurred when you actually get on the field and you start working on the streets, or you start working in those jobs. We see this with military coming back from these wars, these illegal wars, these unjust conflicts, which are really nothing other than empire expansion. They're not really wars of... They always try to make it look like they're out there handing teddy bears to kids or something. You know, that's not what's happening over there. And that's why you have men and women coming back in the thousands that are actually killing themselves because they can't deal with the trauma and the stress that's happened, you know, the post-traumatic stress that's happened in combat. And you see, you know, I've heard the statistics that more men and women in the military today from Western countries are coming back and killing themselves, and that number is greater than those men and women that are actually dying in battle. That's the level that we're at, because modern warfare is completely different. And when you can see that, okay, if that's what's happening, there's something wrong with what's going on. That's a symptom of a deeper problem, and that deeper problem is that this is not a moral conflict. This is not they're not sending people over there to defend those people. They're sending troops over there to overseas, let's say in the Middle East or whatever, to continue expanding the empire and taking the resources. And they've said that there's more people in Afghanistan guarding opium fields and whatnot, you know, for drug trades, than there is anything else going on where they're really trying to liberate anybody. You know, although there are people that are going to disagree with me on that, but I think when you look at everything that's happened since, say, 2003, you'll start to see very quickly that what's happening there is that you've got a class of soldiers that are just doing what they think is right in the moment, but they're actually just following orders of someone that has a higher agenda. And that higher agenda, as it's been in the past, in the present, is expressing itself as, you know, there's something over there that we want. You know, there are many countries that say the U.S. or the UN could go in to help liberate, quote unquote, but they never go there. They go to specific areas because that's what the agenda calls for. It's in the best interest of America to go and take the oil and the minerals and the resources from those areas in the Middle East. And then if we bring it back to just the local level, you know, by and large in America, we're seeing more and more draconian type, Gestapo type police action on the streets. We're not seeing benevolent warriors walking around trying to really serve and protect the people. That's not to say that those types of people don't exist in the police and military, because they absolutely do. I don't think that the proper thing to do is to just, you know, completely shut down the police and military. I just think what this is we have to go through the process of re-educating the men and women of the police and military. And I know many of them are craving this kind of information. They're craving the knowledge that's contained in this warrior philosophy, because that was what originally inspired them to get involved with something like that. But once you get into it, you realize, oh, it's been corrupted. We're not being trained in this area. We're not being shown this. We're being taught to become dehumanized so that we can be more efficient in combat. We're taught to see the enemy as an enemy and to give it all kinds of negative connotations in our minds so that it's easier for us to kill when we're told to kill. You know, you're not out there serving your own intuition when you're on the battlefield, as it would be thought of in the warrior tradition. You're out there serving, or you're following orders, and that's the bottom line. And when you're following orders and you're not questioning those orders, and you're told go in there and take out that village or arrest those people that are protesting or do whatever, you're not going to question that. And a lot of people get off on that power, and because they're not really empowered from within, they need to victimize other people, and it becomes very much about serving the ego, and as opposed to serving the heart. So if you really want to break it into very, very simple terms, the soldier is really the class that's serving the more egotistical side. That's the egotistical or the more inauthentic side, where you have to shut off your intuitive faculties in order to do your job, and which is actually, what does that turn you into? That turns you into a robotic type entity. You're no longer a human being. I remember Bruce Lee spoke many times about this, where there was that was the danger, where you have like the natural instinct, and then you have the control that you're learning in martial arts, the overall empowerment and control. And you have to bring those two in harmony. If you don't, it'll produce these big, wide swings between, with that pendulum, and you're going to have these negative repercussions. So warriorship is completely different in this concept than soldiering. And that's why I'm bringing this out now, because we're not saying that everybody that wants to understand warriorship has to go out there and learn how to kill somebody. That's not what we're saying. We're saying we're trying to bring forward the best of the philosophical elements of what real warriorship is all about, to empower you and to give you an overall immune system, physically, psychically, and spiritually, so that you can defend yourself, defend others. You know how to have courage and to walk with courage and to follow your heart and follow your intuition. And if we can educate the people in the police and military about that, then I think we would have a completely different situation. So, and I think there's a reason why when you go and learn from a police academy or the military or whatever, you're not getting those real values instilled in you. I mean, it'd be extremely rare. And that's why we're seeing so many negative effects taking place, is because there's some very key ingredients missing from the education of our modern day warrior class.
Totally. No, and I'm just so grateful, David, for you opening up this whole very, very expansive topic of the path of the warrior, because it touches on, I think it encompasses everything that we see at the moment that's being inverted. And if we just go back for a moment to the warrior class idea and the principle of there have always been a number of predators of various types in our world, in our environment. And we've always had the protectors. We've always had our warrior classes to call upon to stand up and protect us, or the sense of that sense within us as individuals. And this has been, eroded in a whole myriad of ways, until really we're quite weak and pathetic, and where those of us that would stand up and protect us perhaps are drawn into the police forces and so on, and then that is in itself inverted and perverted, so that these people often then are deceived and end up being self-deceived, and in that terribly distressing place that you commented on there, when they come back from the field, however that is, and they themselves are destroyed.
Yeah. There's a scene in the movie The Last Samurai, which I found very powerful, where the whole concept of the movie is that you have this guy who was serving the American military, and he had been, he's very depressed, he's an alcoholic, he's very, he's lost himself completely, and he's being hired by the Japanese government to go over and train the Japanese samurai class and convert them into soldiers, and convert them into a specifically American trained soldiers. So they wanted the soldiers to come out of they called it, bring them out of the dark ages and bring them up to speed. And we want modern warrior class. We want an efficient warrior class. And so, Tom Cruise's character, he's supposed to go over there, and he's paid to go over there and train them. But he's suffering deeply inside, because he's had to do this before, where he had all these missions to go out and take down the Cheyenne, which were the natives that they were combating against in those areas in the West. And he's got all these nightmares, and he's suffering tremendously inside from the stuff he's had to do, because he's had to go out and kill women and children and be a part of taking over and burning villages. And so he's got a crisis of conscience happening. And the whole film is about how he meets these samurai that he's supposed to convert into soldiers or eradicate, because they're considered criminals and rogues, because they're still standing by the old ideals of what it is to be samurai and to be warrior. And they've actually been hunted down by their government. So he's part of the force that's going in to do that. And there's this scene where he's talking to Katsumoto, who's the leader of the samurai resistance, and he's been captured by them, and he's sitting there and he's clearly distraught, and he's like, don't you? Basically, there was a conversation where they're like, don't you feel any kind of guilt or remorse? Don't you have sleepless nights? And Katsumoto's like, well, no warrior has sleepless nights that is not ashamed of what he's done. If you're ashamed of what you've done, then you're going to have sleepless nights. But if you're not ashamed, if you follow a code, if you've been performing a moral action, then you won't be having any sleepless nights. You won't be having any crisis of consciousness, because you'll be doing the full function of what it means to be a warrior. And I'm just paraphrasing there, but I like that story because it's really symbolic of the eradication of the warrior, even though they're talking about, in Japan's history, the eradication of the samurai and what took place in that period of history where the Americans came in and basically rebuilt the Japanese war machine. And in order to do that, so that they would be more effective in serving the Empire of Japan, they had to eradicate the samurai class, because the samurai class, they were there specifically, to serve that function of being true warriors. Although when I say that, people will recall events where that was not the case in Japanese history, but and that's true. There are many instances where obviously the samurai became a very elite mercenary class, but originally the original concept was that they were to serve a very moral force in that society, and it eventually got corrupted, as all things do. So I bring that up once again just to illustrate the difference between somebody who's operating from a place of conscience, operating from a place of morality, operating from a place of intuition and connection to the planet and connection to all living beings on the planet. Like we did last time, Louise, we broke down from the Sikh warrior tradition those 9 tenets of warriorship. And we could go through the code of Bushido, and we could go through the 7 sacred teachings out of the native tradition, and so many others, where there's a strong emphasis on development, spiritually, physically, mentally, a strong emphasis on a moral code, and we're going to get into that a little bit later on, and how that is what differentiates a warrior from a soldier, or a warrior from an average person. And this is why I think the elite classes needed to eradicate that, because they don't want empowered individuals out there, because they can't control that kind of a population. If you want to control an area of land and people, you have to have those people under your rule psychologically. There has to be a sort of mind control, a control of the mind going on, where those people blindly believe what you're selling them. We've seen this with religion. We've seen this with empires and kings and rulers of the past, how they've subjugated their citizens and sort of use that against them and use them to serve to their own demise. And we see this in the present day with politics and what's going on there. So our job now is to bring back the true authentic and the true authentic spirit of the warrior, and the whole concept of what it really means, and how deeply important this is, how there does need to be this function, this archetype, even on an individual level. This has to be there. The warrior can be looked at as an archetype of your own consciousness that acts very much like a white blood cell that's there to eradicate those self-negative thoughts that everybody has that is defeating them, and that's why you can bring this down to the individual level as well, and really call forward that warrior spirit in that arena. And if we did that on an individual level, then we would see, I think, a huge change. We would see a change in our children, the confidence level and the development of our children. We would see a change across the board, because there would be Even you wouldn't see as much criminality running around, because those criminals are running around because there's nobody stopping them. In fact, in many cases, the police and military, they're serving that same cause. I know so many. I've spoken to so many police officers, and they've told me firsthand that they're just as involved in the drug and gangs, and the drugs and the gangs and the money and the prostitution and the dirty, dark, seedy criminality that's going on. They're just as much a part of it. They're taking money on the side. They're just going out there and perpetuating criminality, not stopping it. And so when you see that, and I hear them telling me firsthand that that's what's going on, then that's a clear indication that this whole concept of what that means to be a hero and a warrior and somebody that's there to stand for truth and justice, that's been eradicated. And so that means it's time to bring it back, and we have to raise the immunity of our own individual minds, and also the minds of everybody in our society today.
Yeah, and I agree 100% there, David. And it's a great path to be on as well. I mean, as kind of dirty as all these deeds get, it does provide us with very clear evidence of what needs to be done. And I'd really like to, in the next section now, expand a bit more on the emotional side and the spiritual side of a warrior, which quite evidently is not part of the soldier's role. So perhaps we can come back and talk some more about that, David. But thank you for that really vivid description, and it's helped me, and I'm sure many others, clear up the differences between how we interpret the warrior spirit and how we see this in action today. So thanks for that, and let's talk again soon.